Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm Debra Maldonado.
And I'm Dr. Rob.
And we are bringing you the best of Jungian psychology, Eastern philosophy in a Jungian coaching model. And our past two episodes, we talked about the shadow and different areas of life.
Right. We talked a little bit about how it plays out in family dynamics and then how it plays out in work relationships. And of course, there's some overlap there.
Yes, absolutely. And today we're talking about the mind body and how our relationship with our body, really how we do shadow work around our body, which I don't hear that very often. So interesting conversation. Before we dive in, I do want to request that you subscribe to our podcast if you're listening to us on Spotify, iTunes, any of those podcast services. It really helps us get more people listening to this great content.
Absolutely. Yeah, so a small caveat before we begin the conversation, because we know a lot of our students come already with a yoga practice, right? They've either been certified or they practice it for their own purposes. When we read Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, for example, from our Western perspective, we're misreading it. Because if you consider how those texts were written down and what was their worldview at that time, very different than our current worldview of materialism.
And could you clarify what's it, because it's not about materialistic, like I want to be a capitalist, I want to make a lot of money, which could be a part of materialism, but materialism is, how I understand it, it's seeing the world as separate from us, that it's a dual, that there's actually a physical reality that's separate from our own consciousness.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. Another way would be to say that if you ask, let's say, a hardcore physicist today, what is the universe made out of? They would say the foundational element is matter, material, right? Matter. Whereas in the Upanishadic universe, it was consciousness. In other words, the foundational element, the real of the people that were writing the Upanishads, the Yoga Sutras, the yoga philosophy, was one of consciousness. It was that consciousness is the foundation of the universe, not material matter.
And just another little distinction is that a lot of people, what they ask us, what do you mean by consciousness? Because the term consciousness is used sometimes in psychology of being awake. Being aware, what you're aware of, what you're conscious of. And we're talking about consciousness as being kind of the foundational element that creates the universe. It creates everything. This energetic experience that we're in, in Eastern philosophy, they use the term Maya, which is this dreamlike experience, but it's all part of one thing. It's all part of that unified consciousness. Whether we're conscious of it, and there's parts that we're not conscious of.
Yeah, so here it gets a little tricky, because then we can say that from the Eastern perspective, the body is an appearance in consciousness. In other words, we look down at our bodies and it appears to us as an object in space, in space-time. Therefore, it's part of Maya, like you were saying. It's part of the illusory kind of apparent reality, not the absolute reality. The absolute reality is consciousness. The apparent reality is the way the universe appears to us.
I think a really simple for me to understand this is that imagine you walk into a room, and a dark room, and you see this thing that appears on the floor and it looks like a snake, and you shriek in horror, but then you turn on the light and you see it's just a rope. Now, the snake existed, but it didn't exist. It existed in our mind because we did have a reaction to it. But the ultimate reality is that it was a rope. And so it can exist in both ways, that our world exists with this dark and light, happiness, sadness, all these changing realities, they do exist, but the way they exist is not absolute. So when we think about anything in life, we think about, is it a rope or a snake? Like, is it real or unreal? And in that moment, that snake was real, especially when we think about dreams. Another way to think about it is when you're dreaming, you're in this reality that you think is so real, and you're caught up in it, and you're crying, or you're running from danger, you're angry, you're playing out different characters, and it feels so real. And then you wake up. And so was it real or was it not real? But you had an experience. And so I love the idea of thinking of our world as an experience, that you can't deny you're having an experience, but it's not as real as we think it is. So it kind of counterpunches some of the arguments. Well, I can see this, I can feel this. So how can you tell me it's not real? And it is a reality, but it's an apparent reality.
Yes, that's right.
Just like our body. And that's where we're getting to, right?
Yeah, the other caveat is just so we communicate a way of understanding our teaching and our work, is that we emphasize philosophy. We're not interested in religious ideas per se. I mean, they're interesting to us from the perspective of Jungian psychology, of course, because of symbolism. But in our approach to working with these ideas, it's the philosophy that we're interested in, which means that we're able to question it and to contemplate it and to modify it to where it makes sense for us. And that's an important distinction, that we're not asking people to believe in a certain thing, but to really question it for themselves and have a direct experience of it.
That's really important, because so many of us, I know when I first started doing personal development and reading books, you become like a sponge, and you're not really questioning because the person has an authority, and you think, well, I have to believe everything they say. They're speaking the truth. I think in religion, we've all grown up thinking, well, it's written in the Bible or it's written in this text and it must be the truth. And I love this idea of philosophy being something you can question. And that's really how you understand it yourself, versus just repeating or understanding something that you're just repeating in your mind and believing without questioning it. When you really question things, that's when you really understand it.
That's right. And then the third part is this understanding. It's very subtle, but it makes a difference. That when we consider, okay, the mind body as it appears to us is part of the apparent reality, the snake, if you will, the appearance of the snake when it's only really a rope. In the Upanishads, when you get down to the non-dualistic nature of reality, it also means that the appearance is emanating, or let's say it is pure consciousness as well. In other words, that the appearance of the snake, the appearance of the apparent reality, is not separate from that consciousness.
So the dream is that even though it's an apparent reality, it's still part of consciousness.
Very much so.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about our bodies, we're talking about consciousness, a body that is made out of consciousness. It exists within consciousness, and we experience it, my bodies, in consciousness.
And so when we're talking about mind body, why would someone want to understand this? Because many of us have had illnesses, have had pain in our body. When I was a hypnotherapist, I worked a lot with weight loss and had nothing to do with dieting, which was stopping people, and pains and aches in their body. And what is really going on here? What is happening in the body? And it's an expression of consciousness. So it's just like in our mind, when we think negatively or we have a emotional pain or like a mental pain, when we think about something negative or bad in our life or worry, the body is reacting the same way. So it's holding all that information, and it's how do we make ourselves healthier and also enjoy being in this body, this beautiful place that we're living our life in.
Yeah, it's certainly a double-edged sword. our bodies allow us, our mind bodies, right, allow us to experience the world in all its beauty. But it also comes with that price of you're going to have to experience aging, illness, and death. Those three things cannot be taken off the table. And therefore, they're always part of our human experience. The question is, what do we do with those? Do they simply cause us suffering, or are they part of our learning, part of our kind of our way of awakening ourselves up to the reality of this consciousness, this pure awareness?
And so there's a lot of practices in the East with breath work and getting into the body, meditation, where you're yoga to kind of relax the body. But I think the biggest question, Rob, and I think this might boil everything down to this, is we always get this question. I've had people who've done lots of personal growth get really serious illness, like they get cancer, they get some kind of autoimmune, or some accident happens, or, to their body. And they ask, did I create this? Did I create my cancer? Did I create this diagnosis? Because it is an expression of consciousness. So if it's connected to me, then I must have done something wrong, or there's some pain, something that I haven't, something unconscious that's causing this. And I think a lot of people blame themselves when they get this, especially people that are on a consciousness journey. They look to themselves first, like, why did this happen to me? How did I cause this? So how would you answer that in the context of this conversation? Because I think that's a really big question people ask.
It is a huge question. So I'll do my best in the short amount of time. But the idea is this, that when you say I created this for myself, you're talking about the ego, essentially, or your persona, as Jung would say. That's not who we really are.
Like your conscious self, conscious identity, even.
Yeah, the I, the sense of I kind of arises in our mind simply because we're seeing objects and we're seeing the universe as separate from us. Therefore, we think there must be an I.
Like at our body, we see that we have a separate body from other people and a separate awareness that creates that I.
Yes, it creates the illusion of the I. So the I, the ego, is part of that illusory nature of the universe, that it appears that we're separate and individuals that are creating our own karmic suffering, essentially. And there is something to that in yoga philosophy. The samskaras essentially are, we can think of them like what we now call in psychology conditioning. The conditioned patterns in our behavior and our way of doing things are mainly run unconsciously. We're not really aware of them. We pick them up through learning, through observation, through just being in the environment. And those things often are what cause illnesses, especially chronic conditions that we see. We're playing out these patterns over and over, and the symptoms that they're manifesting are what we call chronic conditions.
Well, also too, genetically, we inherit from our family. A lot of times people have genes that are more prevalent to have cancer than not, or have different illnesses. So there's that element that it's like you didn't choose to have this body with this DNA. Your ego did not choose it.
Yeah. The whole idea in Eastern philosophy of this individual I is the idea is that it's illusory. We do not exist as individuals in any sense, right? We're part of a collective. We're social creatures. We exist in this larger biology of the planet, and everything that is alive is connected, genetically, biologically, atmospherically. All of these connections are there. And so to think of ourselves as individuals kind of in isolation is really the wrong way to understand our human nature.
And there's a lot of also social experiences. I mean, we share food that has poison in it. I mean, there's a lot of other contributions to why our bodies get sick. We live in this world where there's a lot of unhealthy foods and chemicals all around us. So it's like a collective experience that we're in the Maya, even though we have an individual perspective. So when we talk about how do we become healthy, knowing this, that there's all these things that we're not conscious of, that we didn't consciously individually choose, or we can trace back, let's say, what the cause was. How can we work with the mind body in a Jungian coaching, on our theory perspective, to help people really optimize their health, be, in the shape of their life that they want, reduce the signs of aging, be vital and have energy and even happy, like feeling good in the body without being stressed all the time.
Yeah.
So all that in one episode. How do we do that?
Well, I mean, really, if we look at yoga from this philosophical perspective, the aim was not relaxation or stress management. That was not the aim of yoga. The aim of these ancient yogic systems was to prepare the body for self-realization. In other words, to realize that you are that consciousness, that universal consciousness, that you are not this body that appears to us to be housing our mind and our awareness. That's not who we are. It's an aspect of our being and an expression of our consciousness, but it's not our true identity. That's the way to put it. And yoga is more of a psycho-spiritual discipline to align all the essence of our being with that higher consciousness. Right?
And so basically, if you have an illness or let's say a dis-ease, they call it, like dysfunction in the body, that you want to get back to optimal health. I always, was trained with the mind-body work that I've done earlier, is that the body already has the information to have perfect health. It's just that there's an interference in that information with this, like environmental or mental, like stress, that causes the imbalance in the body. And so how can someone, let's say they just got through like a very, chemo or something, and then they are, got a clean slate. How do they stay and like optimize their health, or even as they're going through these difficult times? Like, how do they hold their mind in a way to help them create and activate that natural healing of that the body has? Because we look at homeostasis. When we're cold, the body shivers to warm up. When we're hot, the body sweats. Like, we have these mechanisms that are perfectly beautiful. It's just that our ego, that I gets in the way of us having that health.
Yeah.
And so is it that kind of consciousness, moving the separation between the body and mind and the true self?
Yeah. In the yoga system, we see this remarkable alternative way of perceiving our bodies, instead of the Western kind of biological perspective, right? That we are this soft machine that's run on biological principles, and that the rest is essentially our mind, our imagination, our sense of pain and suffering that derives from those symptoms. In the yogic system, the body is seen as these different sheaths or layers of the body that can be treated and aligned separately. So the
koshas?
The koshas, yeah. The koshas simply translates as sheath or layers. So the sheath, the external sheath is the physical body, and it's made out of food. It says it's made out of food. The food you eat essentially is translated into these organs, what we see as our skin, our hair, and all these kind of physical qualities of it. But deeper layers get into the mind and understand the mind as a big source of how we're approaching our mind body in its environment. beyond that, though, is the wisdom mind. And that's really the key to understanding health, wellness, even life after death, because it explains that these deeper layers, or this particularly this wisdom layer of the mind, of the psyche, is essentially the key to understanding where the source of our vitality is coming from.
Yeah, it's not, and I think in the West, and we tend to do this in even Western alternative medicine, is to work from the outside in. Like, let me work on the symptoms. Let me, treat the body, right? The physician, or even like Eastern, like some, alternative medicine is like maybe take some vitamins, and or work out or do breath work. All those things are kind of still on the outside. You're still like trying to move the body, energy work, and those are all great. They're wonderful. But it's like going to that other layer, which is the wisdom mind, where the true cause is. So you can work from the outside in or work from the inside out, and that's really how our life. I mean, in a metaphorical way, this is how we change our life. We think if we move around the furniture and our situations and the relationships and people, we can have a better life. But we know that the mind is the cause. And so it's the same thing with the body. It's like you can treat the body, but the cause, you're treating the symptom. The cause is the mind. And the biggest cause, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe, is that we think we're the ego. We think we're the mind body. We think that the mind body is separate from a higher consciousness, and that we can't. It's like, well, it's going to do what it's going to do, and I don't have control. I don't have the ability to direct my mind to direct the body. And in Eastern philosophy, they say the opposite, because you see these yogis, they can stop their heartbeat, they could stop breathing, they could be like clinically dead, but then come back to life. Like you can really have control over the body. I mean, that's mastery. But to know that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it makes, it accounts for more of how we experience our human life. Because these sheets are essentially always activated, and the wisdom is already there. It's simply a process of uncovering them and aligning with them. So, for example, we know there's well-documented cases of spontaneous remission, or radical remission, some people call it, from very deadly diseases,
like stage cancer. 5, and then all of a sudden they're like completely healthy.
Yeah. In Western medicine, there's no accounting for that except to say it was a miracle, right? It's a miracle. Essentially, they're the ones that are using these kind of metaphysical ideas. But in yoga, it's understood that, well, yeah, of course, the wisdom of the body is coming from within and taking care of itself. The individual simply allowing that wisdom to come forth and amend whatever needs to be amended. So it accounts for what we actually see in clinical practices, where people do spontaneously heal their bodies and change completely from within. That cannot be accounted for biologically. Yet in the yogic system, through the sheaths or the koshas, we can see a mechanism for those kind of phenomena.
And personally, I've seen many of those spontaneous healings. I had a friend whose mother was on her deathbed. She had septic shock. And, I just came out of hypnotherapy school, and I said, I can do, a meditation for her to listen to, like her consciousness can listen to, all about healing and coming back, and she's getting better. And within 24 hours, they just played it over and over again. And within 24 hours, she awoke from her coma and was basically, she was alive today. And I'm with my father too. I taught him some visualizations when he was going through chemo, and he had 0 side effects. The first time he went through chemo, I didn't help him because I didn't think he would be open to it. And it was terrible. And I said, listen, let's just try this. And it was just so beautiful to be able to see that you can actually make a change in people's lives. So when we talk about Jungian coaching, though, I want to talk about like why this is part of our training. Like, why do we talk about this when it relates to the shadow? Mm-hmm. And I think many people misinterpret the shadow as something dark or negative, but the shadow just means that we're not conscious of it. It's in the shadows. It's not, there's no light in it. And so when we're coaching in this model, what we're doing is making the unconscious conscious. So using symbolism, being able to communicate with the unconscious, the body has its own, that consciousness that's in the body is all one, to have images of healing, to have images of disease leaving the body. It's so powerful. And there's so much research on this that visualization is so powerful working with mind-body issues, or, the physical pain, physical suffering, disease, all that.
Well, that's a good point. Because pain itself is a mental experience, right? We often think, well, of course it's physical. I stubbed my toe and it swelled up and it hurts. But the pain that you're describing is a mental experience. It doesn't exist in the body. It doesn't exist in the toe or anywhere else. It exists in the mind.
It's a signal to the brain that says, feel this pain.
Yeah. And so that gives us a clue as to what we're dealing with when we're talking about disease in the mind body or injury. We cannot really separate the body from psyche or the mind.
And so when we do shadow work, a lot of times there's like emotions that haven't been tapped into. There's resentments that haven't been dealt with, your self-identity. Like if you think about reverse engineering, someone who's high stress, has high blood pressure because they're stressed out, because they're trying to prop up that persona to be successful, and then really like wrecking their body because they're not paying attention. Then you do the shadow work on them of why are you so attached to this like success, and it frees the mind, and then all the energy comes back. And so there's like a vitality that returns. If we're not doing shadow work, we're basically operating with half of our energy, and the body's just holding on and kind of functioning unconsciously, holding on to it all without our knowledge. And then eventually, if we don't deal with it, it can turn into disease.
Yeah, and the holistic systems have it right. Essentially, you have to consider what is the individual's relationship life like. Mm-hmm. Are they happy? Are they satisfied? Do they have meaningful connections with other people? If those are not there, it doesn't mean automatically that the person is going to be sick, but we know it's a part of the expression of health, right? A full potential, that an individual has to have meaningful relationships in their lives. The other one is meaningful work, meaning they have a purpose. They feel like I can contribute. I'm doing something that is making a difference for others. Mm-hmm. If that is not there often, that's a sign of imbalance. The emotional component, that the individual is able to express their true emotions. They're in touch with their feelings. They have emotional intelligence, right? But beyond that, right, they're able to really express those things. That's a part of a healthy expression of a human life, as well as a spiritual meaning. It doesn't have to be religion. Again, it could be philosophical, but there's a connection to something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
And of course, it includes food, breathing, sleep, all the things that we know come to us, naturally.
And when we think about like just simply stress and what that creates in the body, and it can lead to many, many serious things. But even the state of mind is really asking yourself, like, what is so, like, when we think about our day, and you just look at the outside of a person, like what you do throughout the day. You're sitting at a desk, or you're, working in an office and you go home. It doesn't seem like a lot of work, right? It feels like you're not lifting. Well, some people may be lifting rocks or, doing heavy construction, but it seems that those people that are doing less physical work feel like they're working. And what's happening is really the mind is working. The mind is doing all this extra lifting and anxiety and stress. And so you can be very busy throughout the day and get a lot accomplished. But if you bring the mind of worry and stress and competition and all these other psychological patterns that we get from our conditioning into the mix, then it becomes like, wow, I worked so hard today. And but you actually look at the physical part from the outside and like, it doesn't look like you're working hard. You're typing a little keyboard and you're answering emails or on the phone. Like it doesn't seem to an outsider, but the work is really going on in the mind. And so we need to work with our mind because the body is listening. The body is absorbing and like a buffer, taking on all that stress. And eventually it's going to ask for some payback or it's going to say, stop.
Yeah, and unfortunately what ails many people today are not diseases of infection and germs and bugs. It's essentially lifestyle. Their relationship with food is off balance. They're eating the wrong kinds of things. They don't have a good way to de-stress, like you're saying. A good way to manage that stress.
It's like Netflix and chill.
And it becomes then a chronic pattern of a stressful mind body. And sleep often is disturbed, as well as breathing and basic human functions are not operating at optimal levels. And that, if you put it all together, that really defines the lifestyle of ill health.
Yeah. Well, if you
see it many.
If you think about it, most of us sit at a desk and they say sitting is the new smoking. They always say like sitting all day. And they may think, well, it's sitting all day is not good for you. You should walk around and move your body. I think that's important, but I think the real reason why sitting is so bad is because we're all in our mind. And when we walk and we take a break and we kind of interrupt the pattern, have a pattern interrupt, we kind of get to clear our space. I think that's the real benefit beyond the physiology, but I think it's the mind of sitting and staring at that computer and not getting up and rushing back to work, feeling like you're going to miss out or something's going to fall apart if you're not there answering every email or, dealing with the latest crisis in your company or your team, that something's going to crumble. That, I think, is really the illness that's causing the illness, not the sitting itself. Because when we sit, we are in our heads more. And when we're moving around, we start to feel lighter and move and kind of get distracted. And it's just a way to shift our energy.
Yeah, so we can see then symptoms, or what we call symptoms of illness or ill at ease, right? We can say that that's the shadow. Though it's giving us an opportunity to become conscious of our unconscious patterns that have been kind of imprinted or ingrained into our mind through habit, through learning, through unconscious kind of adaptation. And we're playing out these patterns and they're showing up as shadow, essentially, for us, as disease or as being ill in our body.
And so the solution is the first step, I think, and this is a weird thing to say for most people, but those who know us know it's not so weird, is that whatever's showing up, whether it's a serious illness or a slight little, stress reaction or feeling stressed out or burnt out or all those things that we all experience in the Western world, is that we want to look at it as an opportunity. We want to look at if you get a diagnosis or you're feeling burnt out, like, what's the opportunity here? There's something here. And for a lot of people, it's an awakening when they have this something happen and their body's just saying, I can't take it anymore. Something's got to change. And so you say, well, what is the opportunity here? And how can I master my mind? And then through the challenge that you have, you can actually, the goal is enlightenment, right? The goal is self-actualization. And that's going to give you so much more than just a nice note from your doctor saying you're cancer free, or your heart rate is normal again. And you can have this amazing information about what consciousness is, and you having control over your life that way. It's so powerful.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of work to be done there. But we're actively incorporating and integrating theoretically these Eastern concepts with Western medicine, so that it gives us kind of a larger picture from which to draw from, a better understanding of what the mind-body is, how to approach when illness appears, how to approach that, and how to learn from that.
And there's such a need for coaches that are there's a lot of nutritional coaches, health coaches, but they're taught about, again, the outside in and maybe stress relief. But this is a lot deeper. That's what depth psychology is. It's going deeper into the cause. That's way beyond just the symptoms. And I believe, Jungian psychology is the bridge between the Western world and the Eastern philosophy. And that our Jungian coaching model is really profound in a way that you can coach someone through, whether they have an illness or they're stressed or stressed executive, how to access the wisdom mind that in them to direct their life, instead of feeling they're reacting to life, to actually consciously create their life. And that's really the goal.
Love it.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us. We'll continue this topic on the shadow with another episode next week. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you're watching us on YouTube, post a comment below. Let us know your experience with working with the mind body and Eastern philosophy and Jungian psychology. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And we'll see you next week.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.